Nature of Society Part 5 Session 6R. The last topic, and this is the last video on this course, that will be discussed in this course is the administrative implications of site value taxation. This is designed to answer any questions that you may have on SVT and how it may be administered in any economy. With new sources of revenue desperately needed at local government level in most countries, what better way to obtain this than from the economic activities of these local areas themselves? Based on ability to pay, taxes could be derived from burgesses based on the economic activities that they engage in on the sites that they hold. Gone would be the reliance on central government to address the physical infrastructure and social welfare needs, and this would be advantageous for two reasons. The first is that the communities themselves, being closer to the problems, can respond more satisfactorily, and secondly, the communities themselves can set the tax rules applicable based on capacity to pay and the projects needed to be implemented. We seek to list here the administrative implications that will no doubt arise when site value taxation regimes are being contemplated by communities. The guidelines prescribed here are to provide clarity, order, fairness, and certainty to the physical development of communities. We may be aware that in most countries, physical development may be guided by a national physical development plan, and development works may be administered by a town and country planning department, which may have its legal and legislative authority from a Town and Country Planning Act. If citizens wish to develop lands under their control, they first seek permission to do so based on what would be permitted on such lands and in such communities. What may be permitted is usually based on what the community's needs are, as well as the optimal and economic use of the site, subject to the most enlightened environmental considerations. Town and country planners usually develop the macro physical development plans, as well as such local plans based on these considerations. Citizens, although abiding by these prescriptions in their economic activities, often must apply for change of use because of the changing community needs over time. Lands that were once applicable for agricultural use may now be needed for industrial or residential purposes. Lands that were once used for residential settlements may now find that they are needed for commercial activity because of expanding cities and increasing populations. Town planners must respond to these needs, ideally more proactively, and they must work more collaboratively with land valuators to develop these revised plans in anticipation of changing community needs. In a site value tax environment, economic considerations will hold as much importance as would planning considerations. The plan must reflect the best physical and economic use of the lands under consideration. Plans for expansion must hold equal sway to plans for in situ development. Remember, we are asking citizens to pay their fair share of economic rent, so that plans must be amenable to the aspirations of them for maximizing the economic potential of their sites. However, this must not be at the sacrifice of enlightened environmental protection. We will now address these issues that are likely to be confronted when transitioning to and continuing in a site value tax regime. The resolution of the issues is common sense based and is unlikely to be overwhelming or providing obstacles to the anticipated physical and economic expansion. Question: with the new dispensation that is site value taxation, what are the processes that will be entailed? Site value rating seeks to quicken the pace of physical and economic development, and in this regard, the process of obtaining development permission will be speedier than is currently the case. Prior to a landowner receiving outline planning permission for any site, and this only takes place when the owner applies, a certification of development potential may be issued to him, indicating what the site value rating is, and when it is likely to go into effect. This rating may be challenged by the owner through an appeal to a land value commission that is set up to adjudicate on such appeals. Both parties, the appellant and the valuation department, will present their cases to the appeal board for resolution. The owner may accept the certificate of development potential and thereafter apply to the Town and Country Planning Department for outline planning permission. This application, when received, stops the clock on the implementation of the site value rating for a period known as the development period, and this period will vary based on the type and size of the development. The obligation to pay the SVT is only postponed as the amount foregone is aggregated to the tax after the development period ends. Application to extend the development period will be granted by the local government authority overseeing development works, only for extenuating circumstances. The normal state certification of development works that is granted by the Development Authority will continue to apply. Earlier in this course, it was shown how vacant lands are valued, certainly the common approach taken by land valuators when confronted with vacant lands. In any event, the site value rating is an annual exercise, and as development proceeds, the rating exercise will become more accurate as time goes on. If landowners are aggrieved, there is the appeal process, but they can be comforted in knowing that over time, market values will become common knowledge, and whatever site value ratings that have been inaccurately arrived at, the benefits would accrue to the community of which they are a part. Certificates of development potential will only be issued to lands that are properly serviced by infrastructure such as roads, water, sewer, and electricity. Question: certificate of development potential existing and planning permission subsequently refused. This may be the case where the developer seeks permission for a project that seeks to make the highest or best use of the land, but finds himself not conforming to the planning dictates of the Town and Country Planning Department, TCPD. With the TCPD, there is an appeal process for development application that have been refused. When planning permission is sought, this immediately stops the clock on the developer's obligation to pay the SVT. The development issue may now go through the appeal process to be eventually resolved. And when so done, the time lost through the appeal process is added to the development period. Question: would not the planning authorities be overwhelmed by this new dispensation of CPDs and outline planning permission applications? Here is where the improvements and restructuring of the planning and valuation authorities will be necessary. These authorities would simply have to respond to the needs of the community with respect to development. Thankfully, the process of determining the market value or site value of lands relies solely on information received from the communities themselves. The valuation department simply must find an efficient way of determining what values these communities place on the various sites. And the planning department also must find an efficient and effective way of determining the highest and best economic use of the lands. Both authorities then must convey to developers what is permissible, taking into account what is environmentally acceptable. Question: how would the land bank and exchange system integrate with this system. The Land Bank and Exchange System, LBES, is one of the important elements of any site value rating system. It is a database where the state, private sector, and citizens can download information of what sites are available and not available for acquisition and/or development. The possibilities for development are commercial, residential, agricultural, industrial, recreational, and not-for-profit sites. It is the place where the interested parties can also dispose of their sites where they no longer wish to pay the SVT and/or acquire sites they wish to develop. The LBES is a most dynamic digital hub, accessible to even those non-techies with the appropriate assistance at offices throughout the communities, and will be based on the Google Map technology, where every site, recent and aged, in the community can be displayed. Those sites that are occupied or taken are clearly demarcated, and those that are available with the applicable site value rating are also listed. Those persons who give up their sites to the LBES will have their SVTs stopped, subject to outstanding arrears. Those entities who take up sites will have the SVT obligations commencing, also subject to the planning permission protocols mentioned above. The applicant can be shown multiple digital images of the neighborhood in all three dimensions so that he can have a full appreciation of his proposed acquisition. The LBES will be accessible to all citizens, and sites will be acquired on a first-come, first-served basis, and the system will have the appropriate security and privacy measures that will allow site holders to pay their SVT and other taxes online. The LBES will revolutionize how development is done in any country. It will render most egalitarian the issue of land acquisition to all members of the community in a most convenient, orderly, and cost-effective way. It will render obsolete the age-old system of registration and conveyancing of lands, which has delayed considerably the development process. In this new system, all that would be necessary is the certificate of acquisition and the evidence of paying the SVT. Question: would not landowners have to be traced before they could be taxed? A properly functioning LBES requires that an accurate system of site identification and registration be undertaken initially. This would require adequate funding, but with the advent of such apps as Google Earth and Google Maps, such an exercise need not be onerous or long. The results of the exercise would have to be confirmed by actual landowners before moving forward. The LBES will update these registrations on an ongoing basis. Those sites that remain unregistered will be subject to notices in the Gazette and other media, the LBES website, and even the physical sites themselves. A suitable period will be given for compulsory registration, failing which the sites will be placed within the LBES for acquisition by interested parties. Many sites have owners who have died intestate, and their sites remain unconveyed. The LBES will identify and resolve the disposition of these valuable sites in favor of development in the communities. Question: How could the valuation process take into account such factors as non-economic sites, sites with buildings of historic or architectural value? It is for the country's legislature to render any such number of sites non-economic, of historic or architectural value. This may require proclamations that such sites may not be taxed at the site value if non-economic activity is taking place. The same for recreational and public spaces. On an annual basis, this will be up for review, and the legislature will be notified of the SVT that will be foregone. Even if the impact of the land value tax reduces the acquisition cost of land, would not substantial sums be required to purchase land? The introduction of a land bank and exchange system into the public domain substantially lowers the cost of acquisition of land, if not reducing it completely, because more land is now in the market for acquisition. The obligation to pay the annual site value tax does this very effectively. Think of the substantial reduction in cost of any project. The land acquisition cost is reduced substantially. The cost of living and the purchasing power of individuals would also improve significantly because of this. Land required for public purposes would also benefit from lower costs and easier acquisitions, which is not the case in most countries now. Governments can also easily refer to the LBES to see which lands have become available for public usage, which can be an efficient way that public projects can be realized without the need for compulsory acquisition. Question: what about the treatment of slums? Would SVT improve the renewal of depressed communities? Without a doubt, SVT would aid in the least expensive and most efficient removal and renewal of slums and depressed communities. With more lands available for development, as well as more and better paying jobs, the decanting of persons living in such communities to allow for upgraded development should be far easier than is now the case. These depressed areas should be considered development areas, areas for development, and should not be subject to site value rating. In any event, the ratings would be minimal and not have much taxable capacities. The areas can be easily decanted by two fortuitous circumstances. The first is that lands are now more available for housing under SVT and the LBES. The second is that more jobs with greater purchasing power will now be available for persons to acquire affordable homes. The state will now have a reduced obligation to assist in this regard. As these areas become fully decanted, those desirable developments can now take place. There is no cheaper and more efficient way to clear and renew slums than through the SVT and LBES approaches. Question: what about sites that are non-conforming, for example, a residential site in an industrial zone and vice versa? This would apply to those areas that are strictly residential and have examples of other economic activities, commercial, industrial, agricultural, existing therein. The community may find that this is environmentally unacceptable, but the normal community usually has a judicious mix of the various forms of economic activity occurring therein and accepted by all. In the example where strict adherence is desired, the solution may be to apply the higher SVT to the offending entity. In other words, for an unwanted commercial or industrial entity that resides in a residential area, the higher SVT would encourage those entities to move to an area that is more amenable and in sync with the zonal requirements. For a lower value activity, say a residential entity in a commercial or industrial area, we also apply the higher commercial or industrial SVT to the residents. This should encourage the home to move to a more amenable area. Many communities, however, have a mix of economic activities, either intentionally or historically, and may not want to apply strict adherence. The important thing is to find the SVT that is based on taxable capacity that site owners may be happy with and would encourage the development process and meet the revenue needs. The greatest impact of land values is at the margin of commercial areas and the pressure to convert these if they are in residential, industrial, or agricultural activity. Here, with the growth of the community, the pressure of conversion may be unfair to the site holder under a site value tax regime. Even without SVT, the holders existing at the fringe are under pressure to convert, but they usually respond by selling off or converting their holdings into a conforming activity with greater economic benefits to themselves. Under SVT, this natural process will just be hastened, but with holders having the option to efficiently and effectively convert to amenable sites and activities that are to their liking. The persons who may be very directly affected and that may cause the greatest social reactions are the retirees and or old widows who may hold valuable lands at the urban fringes. The state has the opportunity in these cases to provide better social and geriatric welfare than is the case today in most countries, where they can provide upscale accommodation and geriatric care in designated geriatric care centers with first-in-case geriatric care, health services, and excellent leisure amenities. Those not likely to take up these offers will likely have their families take over the management of the holdings and will be responsible for meeting the SVT. Those taking up the geriatric care offers will be selling their sites back to the LBES for development. Question: would SVT, with its affinity for permitting the highest use of valuable lands, lead to overdevelopment and concentration of buildings? Although SVT encourages this, the planning process and outcomes would take all environmental issues into consideration and would only permit development that is environmentally acceptable. The greater availability of valuable land would also cause development to be more rational and demand overdevelopment or the concentration of buildings. Question: how could the support of SVT by the community be assured? Answer: as with all government policy, public education of this approach to taxation will be necessary over a period, outlining the benefits to be had with the system. When they are properly explained and with the social justice element fully appreciated, the community buy-in is a realistic possibility. No one likes having a tax obligation that cannot be avoided, but the SVT based on taxable capacity, the system would be realistically accepted. The system is fair, transparent, and always subject to review. Every citizen has the right to appeal his obligation, and the transparency of information on site values will lead to quick and fair resolutions. Most importantly, site values are to be reviewed annually so that any changes here can lead to a reduction or increase in SVT commensurate with any changes in economic conditions. Question: under SVT, because there would be substantial reductions in taxes on labor and capital, would the tax base now be substantially reduced? Would the revenues derived be able to meet all anticipated expenditures? In fact, under SVT, the tax base would now increase substantially. Think of all the new sites that would come into the economic landscape. There would be a transition period where there will be some taxes on labor and capital and a reduction of the full market value of the sites taken. But over time, taxes on labor and capital will be removed and the commensurate full market value of sites recouped for the community's benefit. Government expenditure would reduce as its obligation to provide employment and social welfare plummet, and citizens become more self-reliant. Revenues will become more predictable under SVT, and the ability to shield the community against the vagaries of boom and bust economic circumstances would be significantly enhanced. Question: what about treatment of the exclusive economic zone in the marine areas of a country? Will SVT apply there as well? The exclusive economic zone outside of the land assets of a country has assumed much economic importance as what obtains on its physical landscape. The fishing and oil and gas exploitation activities of many countries around the world could testify to this. The issue of the taxation of these activities to satisfy revenue and environmental conservation imperatives continue to be an ongoing debate with interested parties. The debate as to whether these activities should only be taxed only when the produce reaches onshore rather than at source, and what should be the environmental imperatives and protocols when resources are being exploited, are the two important questions which are yet to be answered satisfactorily to all stakeholders. That the right balance is to be struck for sustainable exploitation and conservation should be the objective. If there is imbalance, depletion of the fishing asset and environmental degradation caused by oil and gas mining is sure to follow. SVT has the unique ability of creating and maintaining this environmental balance, as well as guaranteeing a sum of revenue. Both issues very elusive in jurisdictions around the world. SVT will, together with enlightened monitoring, ensure that all activities conform to prescribed protocols and that all participants are accountable. As with the onshore SVT, tax obligations of participants have recourse to the appeal process, and the requirements are subject to an annual review. SVT will also allow, when stocks are approaching depletion, withdrawal from the areas under threat. This form of direct intervention is sorely needed in many marine jurisdictions all around the world. If SVT is globally adopted, we will see a significant reduction in the climate change threat that now looms large. SVT obligations can be easily determined based on historical data, like onshore SVT, and a marine bank and exchange system could also be established, similar to the LBES. Entities wishing to take part in marine exploitation can access a license to participate in this system, and the ability to give up or exchange such a license is also possible. The scenarios and questions listed above do not represent all the likely situations to be met when contemplating and transforming to an SVT regime. Every country and community is peculiar and special in its circumstances and will have their own particular idiosyncrasies to treat with. But with common sense and with the end object of economic justice in mind, every circumstance can be effectively resolved for the overall good of the community. An SVT regime should take no longer than 2 years to implement, and the important exercise of educating and communicating with the community cannot be overstated. The first year would involve gathering the data, the ownership maps, the site values, and the development of the digital technology and software to manage the system. Second year would involve publishing the site maps, setting up the Land Value Commission, getting buy-in from the public, and the carrying out of the simulations in all the areas of the community. In both years, there must be public education programs, communication and feedback activities, and simulations shown in the media of how the system will function. We have come to the end of the course, and I congratulate you for bearing it out over these past 46 sessions. I trust that your time spent with me was worthwhile. Please go back through the course and hear the material again, for it takes a few times of hearing to fully appreciate what was said before. No doubt you may not have heard such material before in your lifetime. Also, please read around the subject. We have taken the time to advertise to you in each session publications from authorities that can give you great grounding on the subject. Please email us your questions, comments, and concerns, and we shall be happy to respond to you. So once again, thank you for your attendance, and for those of you who made monetary contributions for this dissemination of the material, a big thank you. We continue to disseminate worldwide and with positive response. Thank you all once again, and God's blessings to you.